And Vipin had asked me specifically to focus on the future of WTO. So we start with WTO. And I think as an opening, my only opening statement would be we've seen the world changing. We have seen, especially with the election of President Trump in the US, we have seen the world moving away from being a place of multipolarity or multilateralism to a place where the might is right is becoming the norm. So, what is very bluntly, and I would ask Professor Fujiwara to start with it, how do you see the future of an organization like the WTO when you have a major power like the US, which does not seem interested, one, in WTO per se as an institution? Also, the US does not seem interested at this point in international cooperation.
Well, probably I'm not in a good position for answering that question, but as far as Japan is concerned, uh, so we have a double-sided kind of opinion in our country because U.S. Has changing its policy quite a lot after Donald Trump, of course, and we are, as far as human resources in the United States, we have some kind of very scary situation. We are really worrying about the outflow of the human resources in the United States because I'm collaborating with the researcher in Boston University, and they have a very hard situation in terms of the reduction of the NSF funding, and also the people, especially the young researchers, has to get out of the United States. So looking at these things, so as you told me that the effect is a lot, and there is a mobility in terms of the human resources as well as the world trade networks is completely changing. So as that's what Japan is observing. So we are really worried about the situation, and at the same time, we want to go along the line of the United States, but we have a two-sided attitude toward that line of the.
So, Professor Murali, if I could ask you to jump in, and we heard a very nuanced Japanese take on this. What is your take sitting here in India when we look at WTO, where India has been a major player, and we see the geopolitics, which is also unfolding almost on a daily basis on social media, especially? How do you see an institution like the WTO? Do you think this is something which will survive what is what seems to be a very tough trying period for it?
It's a very tough question, which you asked whether it will survive. But let me talk a bit about the US and its position with respect to multilateralism and its interest in multilateralism. US has been consistently my way or highway approach. Okay, from the very beginning, since 1946, when the ITO was proposed, and the US Congress did not ratify it, so we had to come out with general agreement on tariffs and trade. So from that day onwards, US has been seeking its path and its interest alone. So what we see US today is a fallout of its constant unsuccessful attempts since Doha round, 2004, then 2008 when the revised text was proposed, and also the crisis of dispute settlement, which happened in 2016, 18. There onwards, it has been consistently seen as my way or highway, or they will not change the domestic regulations. But if you look at the losses wherever disputes they lost, they've never corrected their domestic regulations. So they said, our law is the most golden law, and that cannot be changed. So this pattern has been there in the US systems and the governance. So what Trump has done is just a reflection of what has been happening and followed by earlier presidents also, like Obama. Uh, so the idea that this is just a Trump's creation is a new one, and this is a changed world. I think we are we are see we are sitting on a foolish premise. I think the world WTO will continue to exist because 70% of global trade is still happening through MFN trade. So, and US reciprocal tariff of 10%, which was announced into April 2025, and later on, another 54 countries were identified and specifically applied reciprocal tariffs. The 10% which was applied for all countries, and the reciprocal tariffs were only for 54 countries. And then we have penalties on India, 25% more for import of petrol from Russia. So all these things, just tell you that, Trump is not a team player, and US is not a team player. And US always wanted there are things to be settled and agreed upon by other partners, trading partners. So, in that context, India was forced to reckon with, and India we took as a conscious measure. We took our negotiating, and we also stuck to our interest. Basically, agriculture was no for India, and many other sectors, labor intensive, as Veeramani presented just before me. Value chain labor is a very important part. Labor generates aggregate demand. When you employ 100% of people, that many people spend money, and that's a big force. Money multiplier in terms of. So I think uh, uh, we may see a turbulent world for 3 or 4 years, but once it settles, everything will come back to normal, and it will set a new normal. And I think the WTO also needs to undergo a change. See, fundamentally, WTO is designed to take care of goods trade. But increasingly now, e-commerce and the digital trade has been increasing. So the border has changed from the ports to bank, payment gateway. So this sort of factorization has not been carried out in the WTO agreements. So once the border changes from land ports or seaports, land ports and seaports and airports, to bank payment gateways, there is a fundamental shift in happening at the border. Thank you.
Professor Vipin, if I was to tie in what we are going to discuss tomorrow also, that is deglobalization, and the future of WTO, world trade, somewhere as the rules change, we also realize this is all happening because for most countries today, their domestic policies, the domestic politics has become more important than the international rules and the international laws, something under which WTO is supposed to operate. Would you say that this is something we are observing in a temporary phase, or is this something which is likely to go on, and how does that affect trade finally?
In some senses, you've asked a kind of a deep and fundamental question, right? Because ultimately, government policy, national government policies are driven by domestic politics, right? And yet, at the international level, you have to sign agreements and try to enforce them. Although that enforcing agency, is not voted or elected by, the citizens of any country. So there is no global citizenry which is voting for electing the representatives who run the WTO. So ultimately, these kind of clashes between national politics and international agreement is bound to happen, every some years or every some decades. It's not very clear to me that the WTO would survive. It's not very clear to me what form it would survive in, and whether, in terms of, right? Because any dispute resolution mechanism, WTO is not the only exception. Even our legal system, it begins with a certain collective agreement, in essence, that the rules are okay and we want to punish people who mildly deviate from the rules. But when the rules themselves are fundamentally challenged, resolving that is well beyond the realm of the dispute settlement mechanism, right? So for instance, if a group of people don't believe in private property, you do not take that issue to the court of law, and the court of law decides whether they should be private property or not, right? A court of law operates on either we all agree there should be private property or we agree there shouldn't be private property, and within that realm, it settles, it's marginal deviations from the rule. So now I think, certainly with Trump there is a lot of theatrics, right? But if we keep the theatrics apart, if you look at just effective policy, I think fundamentally the rules of the game have been kind of questioned and challenged. And there, some of the things he says, and this is the issue with the theatrics, right? Because the theatrics get so much of the attention. But if you look at India, right? India is not a terribly easy country to bring goods into. So it's not as if the Americans are all that wrong, right? This issue about protecting the agricultural sector, like where does this issue arise from and what are we protecting? It's not a particularly productive sector. And how did it get here where, we have not had the technological changes that we should have had? Why is productivity so low? And how long will we continue to try to keep this sector as it is, right? Those are all kind of questions that we should think about. So really, I think this is an opportunity also to look inward, right, as to how we got into this situation. Some of the things he says are not all that wrong. India is not a country where it's terribly easy to get goods into. There are serious protections to a sector that's extremely inefficient. And the price for that is not, it's, everyone pays for the price for it globally. But, citizens who live within the geographical boundaries of India probably pay a higher price for an unproductive agricultural sector than most other people in the world.
So I thought that was interesting. I haven't come across too many people kind of being kind to Trump of late. So that's interesting. And also there's a difference of opinion from Professor Murali, who is confident and optimistic that WTO will survive. And
Please.
no, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, see, there are a couple of on couple of aspects I differ from our good friend sitting on the left. Okay. No, see, on agriculture, it's a very complex issue. Now, dealing with agriculture, I've been negotiating this agriculture for the last 23 years. And we have seen a pattern in agriculture, domestic support is being paid by countries. 33 countries hold special rights to pay domestic support. Okay, so they can actually give a particular quantum beyond what has been set as a de minimis for 5% for developed countries and 10% for developing countries. These countries hold quota, okay, of say 19 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion. So they have a fixed amount of some 33 countries. And those countries were given this exemption, one-time exemption, because they have been paying these subsidies since the WTO agreement came into existence. So since it was being paid before, so that will continue to be paid. Now that being so, it creates a lot of disincentive for farmers from the developing countries to enter the market. Now, what was the promise given when we joined the WTO was, you will get agricultural market access. Please give us the non-agriculture market access. Developing countries to give non-agriculture products market access for developed countries, and developed countries will open up their agricultural markets for India. Now, if you look at the WTO agreement on agriculture, just before the agreement on agriculture was signed, there was an agreement called Blair House Accord between EU and US. Now, in that verbatim, that text you can see as a reflection in agreement on agriculture. So the socio-economic realities of developed countries have been imposed upon the developing world. Okay? Now that's one point, or 2-3 points, how many points I mentioned. Now, see, there is another element in terms of tariff. Tariff is ad valorem, non-ad valorem. Now, countries like European Union fixes on non-ad valorem terms and bound it to the WTO. So when they submitted the schedule, they put in a text, something like a tariff like €5 plus 10% plus 10% on 10% alcohol. So that's a very complex way of tarification. If you say 5 euros, it is 5 euros per kg of import. Okay, so you have something like minimum import price into European Union, and then you have on top of it 10%, and then on top of it, if your product has 10% of alcohol content, you have additional duty of 10%. The alcohol content goes up, the higher the duty. So see, ad valorem average calculations of this have never been done. It was supposed to happen in the Doha round. That's why I said Doha round. Doha round is actually one of the critical elements where the developed and developing countries were on the two extreme ends. Okay. Now, the moment you say develop Doha round, you also know that the ad valorem equivalent had to be calculated, and three-tier approach with respect to agricultural tariff liberalization had to happen. So many of this not being done, it's very unfair to say that we have been protecting our agriculture sector unreasonably. You open up, and you sincerely open up, we are ready to open up. Okay, so if you have not done sincere opening up, you're giving partial, you want to retain, 33 countries do want to retain that special rights of giving X amount of subsidies, Y amount of subsidies to the farmers, and there is no regulation that you need to spread the subsidies around. You can dump all your subsidies in 1 year on one product and destroy the market. It happened in cotton. The cotton producing countries, Benin, Burkina Faso, Chad, and one other country, they had 90% of their GDP from cotton production. 90% of the GDP. Now, the US, what it did was, it put all of their money subsidizing cotton. So the world cotton prices fell. Okay, so that's where, these policies, when the developed countries are practicing and propagating in a manner suiting them, it's very unfair to say that, we are protecting our farmers, which is very unproductive. Of course, farmers needs to be protected to some extent, like giving them the green box subsidies, which is permitted under the WTO. There are three kinds of green, amber, and blue. Now, green box subsidies and Article 6.2 developmental box, which is known as developmental box, you can provide subsidies to infrastructure. That is why our efforts have been moving towards providing cold house storages for storing agricultural products, creating mandis, facilitating agricultural farms, and laying roads, good roads, electrification. So all these activities we are gradually moving towards that. So again, I would say it is unfair to say that we are excessively supporting our farmers. We are not. We are moving towards that, but when you have a situation where developed countries do not want to sit and renegotiate agreement on agriculture, and the other aspect is also the external reference price. External reference price is a very important element and barrier in agreement on agriculture, because external reference price is 1986, 87, 89. So 88, 1986, 87, 88. These 3 years reference price is taken for deciding subsidies to be given. Way back. Okay, so the prices needs to be either carried forward, or some sort of inflation adjusted prices have to be. So it's a very complex negotiations, and we have agreed after the Doha debacle in Bali, we had agreed to 2 other agreements. So we were incrementally moving towards agreement and movement forward. But again, we saw some sort of this 2018. The US did not support the dispute settlement process by nominating a judge, lawyer, and supporting the appellate system, which is the second tier of the panel decision. After panel, then you go to the appellate body. That's the final body where things get settled. So see, as you say, it is not as simple as that. So let me put my case there, and okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So let me just add one point to the farmers thing. I'm not an economist, but I come from Punjab, which usually gets blamed for farmers and agriculture. But I think in India, it's also political, the problem, not just very economic. So that would be my two penny here. And Professor Fujiwara, I was curious if you could give us a Japanese perspective. How does Japan look at the changing world today, where we see a movement away from what we traditionally used to call in IR as international cooperation, global governance? Do you think institutions today at an international level are being devalued because more and more countries today do not want to have this global cooperation? They would rather focus more on their own nation states. That is, we have countries which are now more inward looking rather than outward or global or international looking. How does Japan look at this change?
Well, I'm not economist, so I don't know much about that. But in Japan, ordinary people, they have a very great doubt about the role of WTO, because especially after the sudden change of the policy in terms of the tariffs, we are exporting a lot of automobile products to the United States, but we had to change our policy, and we had to promise a huge amount of investment from Japan in the United States, and the same was true for Korea and other Asian countries like Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia. So we have a very big doubt about the role of the WTO. So that's what ordinary people around me are talking about. And at the same time, so you are talking about our own nationals' interests. So that's probably because of the presence of the SNS and some positive feedback of some minority opinions about. So we don't care about other countries. So that's the kind of opinions spreading slowly and steadily, even in Japan, and probably in other countries, in Asian countries like Korea. So that's some kind of feeling. It's not very good situation, as I think. So that's all what I can say at this moment.
Professor Vipin, he's given us the view from Japan. What would your opinion be from India? Is India also wanting the WTO to kind of revive, reform, get back? Or do you think India is also now moving into a phase, or we have moved into a phase, where we want to be more inward looking and we are less interested in this international cooperation, multilateral institutions?
So when I look at Indian government policy, I see it pulling in both directions. And for those of who are kind of more aware with the granular dynamics in Delhi, including that of the ruling party, they would see structural reasons for why Indian government policy pulls in both directions. Because there are groups within the ruling party. I wouldn't say ruling coalition. There isn't much of a there's one party which is supported by those. Yeah. So, but there are elements within the party and which pull in both direction. You would know. You're from Delhi, so we're both from Delhi, right? We in Kerala, we're so far away, we wouldn't know. But so but me, I just I wanted to take up something from what Yoshi just said, right? How do we explain any kind of crisis? So in economics, the big crisis we try to explain are these things called business cycles, recessions and these kind of things. And there are in essence two ways to do it, right? There is you trying to explain the particular crisis that's happening right now. And there, the stories you tell will be a lot around the personas and the personalities involved. In this case, of course, Trump plays that role very well, right? Okay. Then there is, of course, you trying to explain a certain pattern of crisis which tends to recur. In some senses, there is good reason to expect such patterns to reoccur every now and then. At this juncture of history, inevitably such crises will occur not only for the WTO, I think, but also other international organizations.
Yes.
I think part of it goes back to what Yoshi was saying, that the domestic populations in several countries, technological change has meant that they see a lot more of the world outside. But I think technological change has also meant that the ability of national governments to influence public opinions domestically has, at least my perception, is increased. You see, in where there is WhatsApp and messaging, and where people rely on, not rely, almost have a sense of addiction to reels, the ability to control the narrative nationally, irrespective of the country, irrespective of the political party, I think under the new technological circumstances, much more than it was in the past. That's my impression. That force has happened. So you will see, in some senses, a resurgence of certain nationalistic tendency, because most governments will have an increased ability to control domestic opinion formation. That's one. Second, it's also true that most international and this is of course very well known and very well written about, most international organizations set up today don't reflect the fact that China is such a large share of the world economy, and also a world, even larger share of world trade. And not just that, 20 years ago, and Yoshi, this was said about Japan in the early stages of development, that they make trinkets. And then Japan was suddenly not making trinkets anymore. And actually now, if you ask, lots of young people, they will not even remember that people thought at some point that Japan, that was the image of Japan, then that was the image of China, and then the image changes much after reality changes. China no longer makes trinkets. They make some trinkets, but they also are capable of making very advanced technology, and those realities are just not reflected in international organization. It's also not reflected in the positions that the Chinese government takes. I mean, of course, they have some, they show some teeth when it comes to Taiwan. They show some teeth when it comes to, the seas around them. But if you look at internationally, they don't show much teeth. So if you compare their technological capabilities and their GDP levels, they're quite muted. You see, and this is a part of my impression is they have a much longer view of things, right? They want to be the largest economy. They don't want to destabilize the situation till they come to the very top. But the reality, the I think Professor Veeramani at the end of his talk, when he was asked a question, he said we should not ignore the fundamental realities. We should respect them. So most of these institutions now, are so, they've moved so far away from the fundamental technological, economic, production capacity reality on the one side, and that is capable of generating the conditions for a crisis in and of itself. And this has been, of course, well said, very well studied. But I think there's still an underestimation of this, because sometimes the measure of the capacity of government, is, in popular press, one would think the government that shows more teeth is the more capable one. But the Chinese don't seem to show, just because they don't show more, enough, they have much more capacity than the teeth they show, right? So the deviation from reality is far greater than we perceive. And second, I think the closure of the human mind is something that is brought about by this new technology. How many people are going to sit down and read French literature or Japanese novels or whatever else, and political parties now make great use across countries of being able to control narratives at home. I think these two forces at work are capable of disturbing lots of international organizations, WTO being perhaps one of the first victims.
So when you talked about the Chinese not showing enough teeth, the one thing that came in my mind.
It's not that I want the
no,
Chinese government to show more teeth. I'm saying compared to what the
no,
capacity.
it's a saying that they have in China. They say, speak softly but carry a thick stick. So I think that's the way they operate. So Professor Murali, if I come back to you, and Professor Vipin's talked about China and the rise of China, we've also seen that much of the world's institutions have also suffered because of this US-China rivalry and the competition that they have. Do you think WTO is also one institution that has suffered because of this?
Let me answer that, before, yeah. See, when the US-China tussle or dispute or whatever you call, is an outcome of a forgotten Anglo-Saxon model of financing, which was followed in late 80s, where the bank conventional financing got shifted to market-based financing. So the markets took control of financing, thereby enabling firms in US to go and invest in China, and the CEOs making huge profits out of it. So that model also took the control over patents, which was actually held by public sector before, US public sector, and was sold out to the private firms in the United States. And then that went to the Chinese economy, because the model they followed in China was joint venture. Okay, so under joint venture, you are supposed to share all of your assets with the other party, and then both parties share each other's assets, and then the firm thrives. So a different model, if it was used wholly owned subsidiaries, this situation would not have reached such a place. So what I feel is that fundamentally, when government takes decisions about an agreement, about a deal, it is between government to government. But investment usually happens when enterprise to enterprise interact. Okay, so fundamentally, today, if you're asking, Chinese have stolen all the technology, but US firms went and voluntarily gave them the technology. So it's not the Chinese taking away the technology and taking a lead, but United States firms went and sold them the technology as part of the Anglo-Saxon model of financing and the outcome of joint venture combined put together. So I forgot what is your question.
Has the US-China rivalry hurt the WTO?
Yeah, it has hurt because US unilaterally started imposing tariff, which is against the WTO articles. Okay, so in the MFN article it says, Article 2, it says you cannot violate the bound rate. So US has clearly violated bound rate when it imposed 10% in the first instance, and then 54 countries, it's violated very clearly when they raised it to 25, 30, 35, and respectively. 15, 25, 30, 35 respectively. And also an additional duty of 25%. You can't actually impose such kind of duties. You cannot cite a national security reason, Article 21, to impose a punitive tariff on another country. And it is not the president who is empowered to do that, it is the Congress who is empowered to do such an act, even in situations of emergency. And these are well defined in the WTO. Thank you.
Uh, we can have a few questions from the audience if anyone wants to ask a question from any of the panelists here.
And join the discussion.
Join the discussion generally, and also we would love to hear your comments on the issue we are discussing. Yes, please.
So I wanted to throw something at you that I heard in the conference back in October, where Doug Steger was speaking. Doug Steger is the now chief economist of the WTO. And one of the things that he was saying, which I thought was very interesting, was that historically, the GATT and then the WTO reduced tariffs massively from 40-50% on average to something closer to 10. And that really expanded the pie globally. And so what the WTO, he said, what the WTO had been doing up until quite recently was sharing an expanding pie. The pie was. And he actually envisioned his own job, as I said, incoming chief economist of the WTO, as managing a world that now is very quickly becoming a zero-sum game. The pie doesn't increase anymore. Part of the justification is that, as far as manufacturing at least, most of the decrease in tariffs, or the decreases in tariffs for manufacturing that we can expect now will be minimal because it's already quite low. And so it's much more about a zero-sum game, therefore a conflict-ridden institution that doesn't own much currency by way to strike deals. It's, whatever you don't get, I get. Whatever I get, you don't get. And so I was just wondering whether that strikes you as intuitive, or as plausible, or what's the way out, or is that a reason for hope, or for hopelessness?
Anyone who would like to take that?
Yeah, so basically, what you're saying is, developing countries as such gained from the liberalization, and developing countries as such gained in terms of liberalized trade, which happened during the period of, yeah, you did gain, but one particular country gained excessively. So that's where the problem is, and Vipin is not correct, wrong, by when he's saying that US is not to be blamed, because this country dominated about 35% of manufacturing sector production in certain sectors. Veeramani, correct me if I'm wrong. And certain other sectors, the average is about 35% of the global trade. The other dimension is that we also have situations where there are a lot of imbalances in the WTO which are not corrected, like EU-led climate change-driven unilateralism. When you blame for all the activities carbon, and of all the greenhouse gases carbon alone and CO2 alone, and then take policies where you are asked to change your industrial production in a completely different way to address to those challenges. When you know that CO2 is just a very small element in the whole atmosphere, it's 0.04, and it went up from the past 3 decades, from 0.03 to 0.04, and of that 0.1%, human contribution is just 11%. This is very clearly, there are very other carbon producing activities which happen all around our world, all around the environment. Oceans produce carbon, earth emits its carbon, forests produce, deadwood in the forest will actually emit more carbon than oxygen. So these policies, when they are pushed, US obviously will be on back foot. Okay, so that's partly what I have an answer towards your question. And so yes, it did expand by it concentrated that benefit into one country, and the reasons for that I have explained in the before also. Anglo-Saxon model of financing, and whatever happened. So US was in a corner; they could not do anything, so they went ahead and did what they want to do.
Sorry, I don't want to take too much space here, but if you look at the Japanese miracle, German miracle, Chinese miracle, Vietnamese miracle, all of these countries, as the speech we heard before suggested, were trade-driven. So, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by excessive gains in the US, excessive relative to what? I don't think you can deny that the gain was more balanced over the 20th century than what it has become now. At least that's a manifestation, an interpretation of the data.
I didn't get your question. Did anyone get balanced? What were you asking? Please clarify your question.
I was just saying that we went from, it seems as if the data might be interpreted as suggesting that we went from a game in which the gain increases through trade, through the 20th century, to a zero-sum game over the past 5 to 10 years. And one explanation is that the tariffs in manufacturing have reached zero.
Yeah. So see, the tariff reduction can be divided into two phases. Under GATT, whatever was achieved. Under GATT, when developed to developed countries negotiated, as I agree that there was a substantial reduction in the tariff. The moment developing countries joined the WTO in a big way, 125 countries in 1995, thereafter, if you observe the incremental reduction in tariffs achieved is very low. Okay, so to put it all on a tariff liberalization, correspondingly, you also have non-tariff measures increasing world over. That means rules and regulations and standards increasingly playing a detrimental role in terms of market access. So when these are increasing, and particularly in European Union, you have measures like MRL measures which actually target 0.01% of any agrochemical in agriculture products. Such sort of measures are on the rise. This is becoming very, very difficult for developing countries to trade, and it is also for. Of course, we are trading now. It is not a measure of any success, but it's a reflection of that those countries are not implementing these regulations at the border properly. Since 2012, they have started increasing the implementation of the these measures at the border. And we see that, gradually there has been a hit back in terms of globalization, and there is and the world trade has actually tapered, since 2020. So it's a globalization phase which is at the global level. So yeah, you are correct, in terms of there is a hit back, but not all things can be blamed on any one particular measure, but it's a combination of various actors and players which they.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Professor Vipin.
So, in some senses, Jean's comment brought a fair number of things to my mind. Right? One of them is, of course, we need to have some assumptions about, the relationship between the marginal declines in tariffs and the marginal improvements in growth rate. Whether the largest gains are in the early declines of tariffs or, in the later declines of tariff. But if there is some sort of constant returns to the story, then such an argument can be made. There is a more, particularly because the person who made the comment is, in such an important position in the WTO, there is also this always the question of how do we view those work done by people who have come before us? Or more generally, how do we view the people who have come before us? One story to tell is that they got so much done because it was a little bit easier. And it's not, and another story to tell is that they got all that done. And what is it that, why is it that I am not able to get this done, right? And those two different views lead to two different kinds of human action in how to go forward. Maybe a part of the problem is the former view of things. I'm not sure it was so easy to get those things, even if you assume that the gains, not only constant returns, assume that, in the early falls of tariff, the gains in GDP was greater. Assume also that it could have been more potentially equally shared. But this is all potential. To make that happen, then there, given those world circumstances, and then factoring in all the political circumstances that existed then, the wars that were happening in different countries, the dictators that existed, the strange prime ministers, whoever existed, and to make it all happen, I'm not sure it was much easier than it is today. I used to think that it's easy to pluck the low-hanging fruit, till I saw a lemon tree and tried to pick a lemon from which was low-hanging. There's only one problem: there were more thorns in the lower side. So yes, I think that's also kind of the stories we tell. I think
He was not saying it was easier.
No, but he's told it was difficult now.
I think we have time here for some.
We have more questions, please. Yes, please.
Kind of a generic questions. The agreements make sense, but when you know that they will fulfill.
So, fulfilled.
Enforced and fulfilled.
Enforced and fulfilled.
Yes, that's the cornerstone of a game theory, for example. So it is clear that at the moment, no agreement can be considered as stable. That means that risks of this sort have to be put into the calculation, right? So all risks of that sort have to be put into calculation of industrial policy, and that probably means that globalization cannot be enhanced. Simply cannot. They can be large clusters or natural clusters, but nothing. Well, globalization can be implemented to the extent that the corresponding agreement is stable. So I would like to hear
Yeah.
what
So
experts.
yeah. So no, I'm not an expert, but just an attempting. See, there is this economic models, in different parts of the world. Some models have near formal structures. That means, all firms are registered, all firms submit their data to correctly, and all firms are active participate in the negotiations. But in countries like India, where we have this formal and informal sector, and the informal sector's content is argued to be 40%, and some people say it is 60%. So there are different figures. So we put it about 40 to 50%. So at the policy making level. Now, in such countries, getting information is difficult of what that portion of the economy, what it faces. It's like having gangrene in your leg and you don't get information of what is happening in your leg. But that does not mean that that portion has to be eliminated or executed or taken out. So you try to solve that problem, however difficult the gangrene may be. Now, if that is a situation, what you said, agreement is between two governments, but it has to be implemented between players, economic agents. So that sort of a disconnect always would exist. And that will play out in terms of agreements not getting fully achieved. Okay, and in developed countries, you would have observed it plays out pretty well. If there's an agreement between two parties, it gets executed pretty well. But in situations like in the WTO, when it became much more complex, when GATT era to the WTO era, the problem was in the WTO era, lot many players got into with different economic status. And WTO has this issue of self-designation, where a country could designate itself as a developing or developed country, but the LDCs always were borrowed from the World Bank. So LDC list, 54 of them came from the World Bank into the WTO and based on per capita income. So those had a provision to graduate, but that's a different story. Now, if you look at these developing countries, some of them are Singapore, Korea, Hong Kong. So are they developing? Is this the first question? No. So they are much more developed than developing. So so there are these issues also because why did US get into that narrative? The whole issue of S&D was addressed by the United States, and then China actually started using this. Henceforth, we will be called developed. So that sort of a change happened with China. You wanted to say something?
No, Professor Yoshibara, would you like to join in? Would you like to share something with us in response to the question?
So probably no, I have no comment there.
Okay.
So I think I just want to kind of I think Andre's question was, of course, a little bit about enforcement between private players, but also perhaps more so about enforcement of agreements between governments.
The governments cannot enforce.
No, of course they do.
No, they
Of course they do. And so no, so I no, and in a moment you will agree with me.
Yeah, tell me.
So at some point I attended this talk by an economist called Deepak Lal, who has done some, like very interesting work. One of his books is this Poverty of Development Economics, etc., etc. But he passed away, I think 3-4 years ago. This talk by Deepak Lal, which I think some 10 years ago when I attended this, he said, is there American imperialism?
Is there American imperialism?
Is there American imperialism? This was the title of his talk. He was kind of quite senior when he gave this talk. And he said, yes, there is American imperialism and it's good. And he said, whenever he would give this talk, people would get upset. Because, one group of people would like to hear that there is no American imperialism and things are good, therefore. And another group of people would like to hear that, yes, there is American imperialism and therefore things are bad. And his primary argument for why he said there is American imperialism, well, he said there is American imperialism because when he looks at definitions of imperialism empirically, any empirically measurable definition, he sees there is. And he said it's good because there is a player to enforce global agreements. And of course, this too has changed now because there could still be an imperialist power, but there, from a technological point of view, production possibility point of view, it's very difficult for a single, it's no more 1980 or 1970, certainly not the time when Mao died. Which again brings to this question of, from this notion of cheap talk in game theory, right? So maybe the big charade is not Trump. The big charade probably all along, or the theatrics is not so much Trump. Perhaps the big theatrics that we all believed in was the WTO. Did we really think that the tariffs came down because some men decide to wear suits and turn up at places and pass memos and wear these things and, stay in hotels for a while, etc., etc. And they always come to Delhi and stay in the same hotels, right? And then go to Geneva, etc. And therefore, we were able to create the bigger pie that John is talking about. And creating the bigger pie is not trivial. And mostly I've met some of these people myself, and I'm sure you have met many more of them. They don't seem to be the most upright of men or women. And not they often are people who are very capable of working up a bureaucracy, right, which involves currying favors and listening to the they are not entrepreneurs who go out and create new product and challenge the world, either in terms of products or social norms or whatever. I cannot imagine such people leading the world forward. They can do some work at the margin, but I think it was a world where certain decisions were taken, but not only taken, there was an enforcing power. And the enforcing power had to be listened to because of the geopolitical structure of things. Within that space, we created an organization which can argue certain things at the margin, and the arguments made sense because things can be enforced, and there was a sense in which the direction in which the arguments had to go. I mean, if these bureaucrats don't take it in that direction, then we give them a chance next day and say, hey, good try again tomorrow, right? And then when you succeed, you can take the photograph and you say you succeeded, right? So maybe the big theatrics we believed in was, that's where the real action was. And I think this is what you point to is the, I think, the crux of the matter. And I think this is why not only the WTO, many international organizations in the coming decade to decade will continue to suffer because of this absence of one single enforcing agency.
Yeah, Vipin, I have to clarify certain things what you said. WTO is member-driven body. Okay. Now, if members agree, they will put certain things up there, and most often the members don't agree. Let me take one example. TBT notifications. That's actually technical barriers to trade notification is one of the barriers which actually impacts market access. Like SPS, SPS is the sanitary and phytosanitary measure. Like tariff, these three instruments and non-tariff measures, many other non-tariff measures, there are 15 other non-tariff measures and one tariff. So 15 non-tariff measures and one tariff impact your market access possibilities into a particular country. Now, if you look at the SPS notification, this is actually driven by three sisters, Codex, OIA, IPPC. They are well notified. Okay. But in the case of TBT notifications, country-wise notifications was notified till about 2012. After which they have been removed because members put excessive pressure to country-wise notification, to listing of country-wise and product-wise. Okay, so these were taken out. Now, who is to blame? WTO. If you give WTO as an institution the teeth to penalize the members, which cannot be done because we are all sovereign members. Okay, that is where the problem is. So before you go and blame the WTO alone, you need to look at where WTO is placed. That 650 employees working in the WTO secretariat are hard-pressed. They're just another set of bureaucrats doing their job, and then running from pillar to post to take care of, patch up, many issues of daily negotiations, chit chats, whatever happens, mudslinging. Country proposals come up on a daily basis. There are 15 countries which have put proposals, and they have to take a document. They're very busy. So where will they have this interest to go and settle disputes between two countries? See again. See, the WTO dispute settlement system is completely in shambles. You know that 2019, the Trump took away the support for the appellate body. And it is non-functional. Why did he take away the support to appellate body? Because the US lost a couple of cases and they didn't want to change their...
This is exactly what I mean.
I think you agree.
Yeah. That way I agree. Because, when you ask me, agreements are to be enforced and implemented.
Can I now repeat the question?
Yeah.
International organizations are dysfunctional.
Huh?
And
International organizations are dysfunctional.
Dysfunctional. Oh.
Dysfunctional. And because the world is different and new agreements are necessary, but I'm not sure that we have patterns, mental patterns of how to arrange these agreements. Because there's no experience of this sort. We don't, and just an example, we all know that most of theoretical economics and most of theoretical finance is is done at the level of mean values. So even
I
signals are not there, and so risks. So this what I see that what worries me really is the absence of mental pattern to follow somehow. What's the picture that what's the reasonable picture that we can get from now? If we don't have this pattern, this will end up in a much worse situation than with such a hotel. And that was my question.
Yeah, I know. No, I agree. I agree.
If we don't have any more questions, we will wrap up this session. Okay, so one last question and then we wrap up.
So, just wanted to kind of mention that this new nationalism, this kind of movement in the United States and also in other countries in response, is it going to be really sustainable in the near future? There are few reasons to believe that it is not going to be sustainable in the short run. One is that in almost all advanced economies, aging is a big issue. They cannot, continue their current level of living, productivity and standard of living unless they open. In Japan, for example, the average median age is 50. Very, and if they want to continue their productivity and high income status, they have to open. And secondly, Germany 47. Italy 49, South Korea 47, all close to 50, all advanced countries. In the US, it's relatively better, 38. India it is 28, right? So when there is so much of opportunities that exist for home regulation, and so that it's a win-win situation. It's like it's not that the countries that send out people only benefit, but receiving countries also going to benefit enormously in this kind of situation when the average age in those countries are so high and to sustain the productivity growth and economic growth, you need people and talent. So that is one reason I believe that this current nationalist type of tendencies stop it. The other one is that if you look at trade patterns in recent times, after this Trump tariffs came, globally, you see that if you take US out from the world trade is growing.
Growing.
Right? That is 85% of the world is outside the United States. It is growing.
MFN trade is about 70%.
Yeah, so irrespective of what tariffs and all this is happening, protectionist tendency that's happening, commercial interest still survive.
Drives.
And so I feel that what we are talking about right now is shortly. I am far more optimistic about the global economy, about the future and the impact.
A small correction there. Increasingly, trade is becoming in manufacturing. Trade is becoming servicified. So additive manufacturing, and so service sector may dominate. Okay, so I think trade agreement itself has to have a component of how to capture the online trade and digital trade. So additive manufacturing, right? And so there's been course correction at the global level also. European Union has corrected it's simplified its CBAM, and then it is brought down various the climate change related barriers. So there's course correction, as you said, there's course correction happening as we speak also. So that's a good sign. I think we should stop at that.
So we are good. Just very brief question then.
Basically, not a question. I was just like to add to Professor Vermani's comment on the problem of aging in developed countries. And so there was your comment on services, that will be services dominated. But I'm not going to reveal the details of specific negotiations, but studies show that when there are agreements between developed and developing countries with in the services track, developed countries would have very restrictive measures for mode 4, that is movement of professionals. Even though there is a problem of aging and they need the younger population for the service sector, but the problem of MRAs, qualifications in professional services. So, sir, how do you see this situation? Thank you.
Let me not answer that because that will go into the negotiations.
Well, I can say something.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to. So, fundamentally, for a moment, I did agree with what Professor Veeramani had said. But now that you have said what you have said, I'm not sure I agree as much with Professor Veeramani. Because I think economists tend to be economists, right? How kind of immigration policy evolves depends not only economic circumstances but also many other factors.
Yeah.
Human beings have a tendency to be
Environment.
like to be an environment for each
Environment.
person is the other people around. There's typically a desire to be around people who have similar cultural practices or are like us and so on and so forth, right? And this is found country after country, place after place. Okay. In fact, in that sense, perhaps the United States is one of the more open
Liberal.
places. Yes, Americans in general, ignore the present circumstances for a moment, right? In general, they tend to. But if you go to Europe, if you go to Japan, if you come to India, I mean, ask yourself, the editor of Journal of Political Economy for a while was someone of German origin. Suppose there was a journal of that kind in India. Would Indians be open to having someone of German origin being the editor of that? Right? Or even imagine cross migration in India. Not Kerala has lots of people coming in, it's not a big issue, but there are many other states where there are fights because of person of this culture or that kind or this or looking like this. So I think people tend to sacrifice a fair amount of the pie, the economic pie, to implement policies which stop other people from coming in who could have grown the pie. Even when I was in Russia, there was this discussion. I was in this Bank of Russia conference, and there was this discussion about labor shortage. This was, by the way, the only time India was mentioned in the 3 days. China was mentioned many times in the context of technology, technological innovation, growth. United States was mentioned many times. China and United States were mentioned together many times. India was never mentioned. So they have a good sense of the manufacturing capacity of this economy, and I think the sense is quite accurate. The only time it was mentioned was in terms of labor. But the person who mentioned this, and I would not say who the person is, the person who mentioned this, it was mentioned publicly, so it's not a private conversation, was very quick to clarify that the person does not say that there should be immigration of a large number of people from India to Russia, but rather production facilities could be established in India where the workers could stay in India
And then produce.
and the goods could travel. And there are good reasons. Most societies tend to do this. United States of the last century, and particularly pre-World War I, is a gross exception to much of human existence. If you go back, if you think in terms of millennia, the United States of 1800 to World War I, or even till Trump comes into power, is a gross exception to the way human beings have lived for much of our history. We are willing to sacrifice a fair bit of the economic pie to be around people who are a little bit like us. But I don't know. I almost agreed with Professor Veeramani. I was going to leave this discussion in a good mood, but Sarah, you have brought me back to,
Lastly, just
So we end this discussion. It has been a great session, and I think all have come out of this session having learned a few new things.